Thank you all for joining us tonight. This is such a compelling and exciting series, and I can't wait to see how it unfolds over the course. Do we have a fire?
Amber
over the
alert.
course of 8 episodes. But this all started with a 2007 novel by Thomas Mellon of the same name. And Ron, I was wondering if you could tell us how this story first came to you and about the journey of getting it made into the series.
Sure. I read Mr. Mallon's novel probably 11 years ago, just because I had read another novel of his, and I thought he was a great writer, and just dove into it. And I fell in love with the central relationship, which is Hawk and Tim, obviously. And I really liked the fact that it was a love story about people who were basically not meant to be together, that they have very different worldviews. And it's that great kind of sort of love story of, we keep trying to get past our differences, but we just can't. And that, because it's a love story that immediately has conflict in it. And then, it poses certain problems, it's period, in terms of getting something made as a television show, it's period, and it's political, and it was gay. And so I was just, after a few years, the book was optioned for me by my managers, and after a few years, working on Ray Donovan and then working on Homeland, I was kind of giving up on it. And I asked this gentleman sitting here to my left, about 4 years or 5, I think, maybe,
like that, yeah.
To read the book, because I wasn't sure. And basically, what did you say, Robbie?
I said, I love it, and if you don't do it, I'll do it at Warner Brothers.
Without me.
Yeah.
And sometimes a writer needs that. And so I went back to the people I was working with and said, I want to do this. And then we brought Matt on board and then made it.
Beautiful. And so I've read the book as well, and the central relationship between Hawk and Tim is very much the crux of the story amidst the Lavender Scare and McCarthyism. But this series represents an expansion of the world in many respects. And Ron and Robbie, I was wondering if you could talk about what your goals were in expanding this to series length and what you were hoping to explore in that way.
Well, it wasn't so much about the length of it. It was that there was a preface of Mr. Mallon's book, that about 5 pages, I think, really, it's very short, where we see Hawk briefly in 1991. He's received a letter that Tim has died, not of AIDS, of cancer. And I just thought, well, that's very interesting to see Hawk in his 60-ish. He's a father and a grandfather by now. We briefly meet his wife, and I wanted to see that character, and then I wanted to see Tim. So I thought, well, what if but the AIDS crisis in the 80s and early 90s had been one of the formative experiences of my life. So I thought, no, let's address that, and just seemed there's this parallel between McCarthyism and the AIDS crisis. In one, our government was in the McCarthy era was actively persecuting homosexuals. In the AIDS crisis, our government was letting homosexuals die from indifference to us. And I thought that's a great thing. And then I started thinking, well, did they see each other between the 50s and the 80s? And was just really having fun.
And Robbie, what story elements and threads of this really drove you to threaten Ron to make it at Warner Brothers if he didn't come on?
Well, I knew nothing about the Lavender Scare. So obviously, just reading the book, it was that love story set in the Lavender Scare where, like Ron said, they were being persecuted. A love story set where the stakes are so high. Comes with danger, but also a lot of passion. When you finally get with your lover in your apartment or your home, when everything outside is so protected and you keep everything so close, can be extremely passionate or aggressive and all those things, tons of emotions. So I really just love the book and obviously I'm a huge fan of Ron's for a long time. So it was 2 perfect things, I would say.
And speaking of expanding on the book, Jelani, your character of Marcus isn't in the book and represents a significant expansion in the story. So I was wondering, when you read this, not having that text to go back on, what was the most exciting thing about the trajectory of the character, and what can we expect more of this character without any spoilers?
Yeah, I think for me, I still haven't read the book. I don't think I ever will read the book. I think it wasn't useful to unpacking the experience of Marcus. I drew a lot from my own experience. as a queer man of color, I feel like Ron was really open to expanding the world in a complete, honest way that felt viscerally charged and viscerally full of a complex amount of emotions that we still go through today. And so I was really honored to bring Marcus to life because I've never seen an everyman like him portrayed on television. It was really an honor.
And I just have to say, it's such a thrill. The SAG strike is over.
Yeah.
We get to sit on stage with our
Thank you,
brilliant
SAG-AFTRA.
cast.
Thank you for working so hard on that
It's
deal.
been heartbreaking for the last few weeks to not be able to have this voice be part of these conversations. It's such a thrill.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Well, maybe you two could talk about the impetus of Marcus's storyline and the process of bringing that into this story.
Well, I'm going to be just perfectly blunt. I did not want to write a television show with all white characters, in that it was going to be on air in 2023. And that isn't being out of fear, trying to be politically correct, because people know me. I don't try to be politically correct and have sometimes get in trouble. But it just felt morally and moral imperative. But I approach everything from a storyteller, dramatist point of view, and I just thought, well, if it was kind of fascinating, complex, and dangerous to be white and gay in the 50s, what the heck was it like to be black and gay in the 50s? And then to do a little bit of research about the alleged desegregation of DC in that era, and to also see that there were early pioneering black journalists, and the black newspapers were really, really thriving. And so Marcus, everything in our show is meticulously researched. So Marcus is based on real people and real journalists of that period.
I think one of the earliest discussions that Ron and I had was that we are not interested in retelling the story of racism or homophobia, really. We understand that exists. We're interested in telling the story of somebody that overcomes that, how they work through that, how they process it, how they are able to change the world with the obstacles still in place. And so we always talked about Marcus being active in engaging and disarming the world rather than just letting it beat on him and falling submissive to it. And in a way, I think that draws parallels to Hawk, right, as well. This character who is willing to do anything to survive. And so we were like, let's give Marcus that same kind of strength, that same kind of passion and drive.
Well, I would also say, and I'd love to hear that same flaw. You know, that was important to me, and I think that you embraced it.
Yeah.
And Robbie, I think you saw it in the writing, is that none of our characters are innocent. We had a lot of rules in the writers' room. That's just who I am. And on the set, and in both places, one of the rules was there are no noble victims. We're not telling a show about noble victims who are really decent people, and they're very moral, and they're correct, and they're righteous, but the world is bad, and they're struggling against the bad world. Right. That, to me, that's melodrama, that's soap opera. It doesn't interest me in the least. But you know, you wonder when you send the script out to actors, and I'm just curious, like, did you? I'm sorry, I'm taking over.
No, please. I told you, I love it. Conversation about.
I still think I'm the showrunner in life. Yeah. So we're back on the set. Did you like did Marcus's flaw? I mean, both of you guys, I'm kind of interested. Did that like scare you in any way?
No, I'm always rooting for the anti-hero, as Taylor Swift says. I think I actually was excited by that. Okay. The fact is to reveal a necessary evil, a truth that exists within all of humans, that we're not perfect. And we all make decisions based on our need to survive. Wow. And sometimes that is not good, quote unquote, whatever good means. Yeah. It's simply what must be done. Yeah. And in a world where segregation existed and people were being eliminated from their jobs because they were homosexual because of who they loved, I don't think we can judge whether or not they were being good or bad. They were doing what they needed to do.
Yeah, I would just add it's so much more interesting when characters can be flawed, you know. I think, obviously the hours and thousands of millions of hours of like television that you would say like straight television, where you have like all these different characters. And so, in this show, and obviously it's not the first gay show or first gay depiction in media where gay characters are flawed, but like we really let them just be human, and again, survival, falling in love, protecting themselves from falling in love, doing things that someone, Twitter might think is evil, but like it's what I think makes it relatable and not just a gay show, amongst many other things, is that like they're human, they're not, it's not them being gay or straight, they're just like, they have complexities and they make bad decisions, good decisions, and that to me is really interesting. I not to criticize, but sometimes, you go on Netflix and you watch something and it's like everyone has to be good, and it's the exec that's like, oh no, this character isn't likable, and it's like the amount of times I've heard that note from people, it's just like, maybe they shouldn't be, like let them be human and make mistakes. And when, Matt's a good example, when he does all these things, but you meet him in the 80s and you see his eyes and you see his face, that he's showing you that like, okay, I've lived a life, and the audience wants to see what that life is, and that's why hopefully they stay with the show. But I just, Ron, he had many rules in the room, but really I find that to make sure that these characters are complex and not noble, and they're not victims, but they're human, which I really admire about the show.
And I'm interested how the process extends to folks like McCarthy and Roy Cohn, who have been, depicted in popular culture before, kind of larger than life in terms, we all know, like Roy Cohn was depicted in Angels in America in a very fantastical way. McCarthy in like The Manchurian Candidate was parodied, but like grounding them more in reality for the series, what was that process like?
Well, two of my writers are here, and actually one of our other cast members are here. Actually, Matt, who plays David Shine. Matt, would you just wave? Is he not here?
He's all the way in the back.
And Anya and Carl, Anya's a producer and a writer, and Carl worked with us in the writers' room. And I think about it because Anya wrote episode 4 that's going to be airing next week, which is where we get to know McCarthy and Shine even a little bit better. You could do the cartoon version of McCarthy and Cohn, because they're extreme characters. They did a lot of damage. They are villains. They're bad people. They did bad things. But once you reduce a character to that bad person trope, I think that you're doing a disservice to. I just think it's bad art. So there's a complexity to Roy Cohn, especially. In his relationship, you were introduced to it tonight, in the episode, with Roy Cohn's attachment and obsession with David Shine. And this is all real and historical, and it's a love story. There's a way of seeing it as a love story, and somebody might say, how dare you? And somebody did somebody not associated with the show, I said that to them, and they cut me off, and they said, oh, he was a monster. As if somehow that's all you have to say about a person. But Roy Cohn was a human being, and what he faced in his life, his inner demons, created the person who then performed a lot of evil in the world. And I think we were willing to explore that, not to excuse him or McCarthy's behavior, but to make sure that they were not stereotypes of a villain.
You mentioned the meticulous research that went behind this, and like there are so many elements, even in the first episode, that just we talked about characters not being noble, and like the element of gay people informing on each other to save their own jobs, or something positive like the depiction of the nightclub that they all go to. Like these are all things that like didn't ever cross my mind in this era. So I'm curious, from any of you, are all of you, like anything in your research process that really surprised you or you were really excited to depict that might not have been in the general public's knowledge?
Well, something I think is really important, and that is that people had joy. They had joy in sex. And as you can see, from our point of view, they had hot sex. And, just because one is suffering social oppression doesn't mean that you live this joyless, victimized life. Hawk enjoys life. and so that's what I think we wanted to make sure, that we just weren't doing this dreary thing about people we're supposed to feel sad for all the time. And by the way, the Cozy Corner is real, that there was a predominantly black gay bar near Howard University. The singer is Stormy DeLarveray, who is an LGBTQ icon. She was a drag king and looked actually and sang very much like our Chelsea does. And by the way, we have a soundtrack which features this beautiful score in Chelsea. And so I don't know if Stormy ever performed at the Cozy Corner, but we just put her in there because I wanted to see her. So that's where we use reality, and we twist a little bit.
I mean, amongst all the research, and we had, I think, besides Ron, Lewis, our researcher, was the longest employee ever for Fellow Travelers.
And by the way, Robbie co-wrote episode 5 with his sister, and it's a beautiful script.
Thank you.
So good.
Not to ruin anything, because you guys have to watch the episodes, but the stuff that we found on McCarthy, especially that's in episode 3, like that, to me, I had known about McCarthy, and then doing research for this project, and Ron sending me even more stuff to read or to watch about McCarthy. Like, there's a lot of interesting stuff, but so I'm trying to give you guys information without giving you a spoiler. But what happens in episode 3 is really all based off of research that we found, like an affidavit, right, that we found, and an accusation that was real. So, the debate of whether like McCarthy was a homosexual or a drunk or just like an assaulter is up for debate. But what we do in episode 3 is all really based off research. So again, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to give anything away, but really when you watch it, like, it's not something we just made up. And that, to me, I don't know if you've seen 3. That was a surprise. Like, that people were actually made real accusations against McCarthy, because I didn't know about that in history or my research.
Yeah, I sadly hate to admit that as a millennial, LGBTQ history started at Stonewall for me. And there's so much more that happened before that. And this series really introduced me to all of that. And so I felt like I had to do a really deep dive into history. There was a great book that came out right at the time, right before we started shooting, called Secret City. And I read, it's like a 600-page book, but I read like 200 pages of it, and I was like, oh my God, all of this was happening before there's even recorded history of it. Like there's no, I had to read a book about post-World War II life, about understanding what it was like to be a black man coming back to America, having served in the war, and still finding your way through segregation, and getting myself inside that mindset was extremely challenging. And at times it was just overbearing. It'd be like, this is how these people just had to somehow find joy, find love, find excitement, and still be passionate about life with all this oppression. And so I learned a great deal, a great deal.
And another one of our rules was that we're not going to approach our characters and the writing and the scenes with a 2022, 2023 mindset.
Right.
We're not going to say like, well, we want to send out a message.
That's
that
right.
you can, and so let's change. I hate revisionist history. I think it's really dangerous and boring. And, so we really tried to be. So sometimes a younger actor or, might say, my gay identity. And I'd say, stop right there. There's no such thing. It's 1953. There's no gay identity. Mm-hmm. There are no gay characters you've ever seen a movie or read a book or even had a conversation about it.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, if Jonathan approached this character, this staunch gay Republican McCarthyite, devout Catholic, like, could I say anything from a modern standpoint to go against like this role that is probably completely anathema to any gay person, most gay people that would be
today, right?
Today, yeah.
And I actually have received some questions about that. Why would he do that? But if you know anything about the 50s, first of all, communism was real. And so, if you're a devout Catholic, it's an atheist form of philosophy of approaching life. And so you would be drawn to something that is defending your faith. And that's what's really important, I think, in acting and writing, is that you see things from your character's points of view without judgment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we did.
So you mentioned,
I was gonna say you did that, and also you had lots of drip in between too. Everyone looked so sexy and cool, and every shot is perfectly timed out and framed, and it makes it feel like you're watching a dream, even though some might consider it a nightmare.
So I think we have time for one or two more, and you mentioned the sex scenes. We mentioned everybody looking sexy. The show's been noted for the frankness of the sex scenes. What I appreciate, I've seen a few episodes now, and there's this kind of movement on the internet that are sex scenes really necessary? Do they go too far? And I feel like every sex scene in the show also has a narrative purpose, that it changes tones in terms of tenderness or aggression or the power dynamics. So what was the conversation like? Was there any resistance to them being as frank as they were from studio level, and why was it important for you to have them as frank?
Well, the president of the studio, Fremantle's the studio, said, let's make the sex scenes between the guys so hot that straight men watching them will want to have gay sex.
Work. Amen to that.
I don't know. I know straight man that I know has come up to me and said, "Yeah, I fooled around with a guy last night because I saw your show."
No way.
And by the way, if you run into one, give him my number. That's who I usually date. Too much information.
Never too much.
But and Showtime said lean into the sex. They lean into it, and so we all had. But what's really important was that every sex scene moves the story forward. Mm-hmm. So we don't say, hey, it's 20 minutes in, let's take off the guy's clothes, because there was nothing ever like that. And we also had, I can't see my writers back there, but we also had a rule that we would not repeat any sexual position or behavior, and there's so much sex that by the time we got to episode 8, right, Anya, we were scratching our heads saying, is there an orifice left? What? This went there, that went there. What are we going to do? And hold on, episode 8, we figured it out, folks.
Sex changes the temperature of every relationship. Always. And I think what I really loved about the series as a whole, as we evolve in talking about sex in between Hawk and Tim, and also sex between other characters, is that you see quite a stark difference between physical contact and emotional contact in between sex. And I really, really champion both of you for depicting that on television in a way that is so unapologetic and feels, for me, the first time I've ever seen anything like it.
And Ron's heard me say this before, and I said it a little bit earlier, but when you are so guarded, at work, you can't talk about, who you're in love with, who you're going on a date with. You've never been, you didn't go with, you didn't go to prom with your boyfriend. You didn't, there's just so many things that you haven't experienced, and you're hiding from your coworkers and your family and just everyone, you're not holding your boyfriend's hand. Eventually when you do get behind closed doors, that can be extremely passionate. And so I think you really feel that, or I know, I'm sure you guys saw today, you really feel that chemistry and that passion and tenacity in the sex scenes, because again, it's all held back. And so finally when that door's closed, and the socks are off, what happens.
Oh,
They're about power. The sex scenes are about, that was another rule. Every sex scene is about power.
So we have to wrap up, but just as a means of wrapping up, there's the old saying to write about the past, to talk about the present, and I'm just curious from all of you, how do you feel this show coming out now at this moment in our history is particularly resonant to see this story now in 2023?
Well, you can't help but notice that, a show about Joe McCarthy being aired at a time when we see demagogues rising all around us, not only in the United States, but in Europe as well, that obviously there are parallels. And what do demagogues do? They create fear and division. Why? I would guess that Joe McCarthy has really no problem with homosexuals at all. But he knew that if he could scare you or scare you about communism, he had power over you. And I think we're being reflected in our leaders right now. That we can't take them seriously about the issues they care about, the demagogic ones. They are trying to have power over us by making us fear each other. And that is, I think there is that parallel.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in a very eerie way, very relevant to what's going on. I forgot the guy's name that's in charge, the Republican that's the head of the House. What's it? Do you remember?
Johnson.
Mike
Johnson, right.
Mike Johnson.
So I'm like, now when I post stuff for fellow travelers, I like tag him, and I tag like Scott, and I tag like Ted Cruz, and I tag like all these people that say the craziest things or believe in the craziest things, and it's just like, whoa, it's 2023. It feels like there's always people like trying to take us back to the 50s. So when we set out to make this, it wasn't like, it was relevant obviously because Trump was like saying everything that he was saying, but you know, it feels even more relevant now because of who is, and as Ron said, it's trying to politicize and use fear as a tool to, you know, win votes, win power, take over.
The show for me, from a 2023 gaze, feels at the same time it's a celebration, and at the same time it's a call to arms. I feel like, if I'm being very honest, in my generation, I feel like a lot of people are taking for granted the liberties that they have received, that they can get married, that they can have children, that they can build a household together. Those are now like, oh yeah, that's just how life works now, but at any moment, that can be taken away from you, ripped away from you, and you're left with living in the shadows and in secret like this. And so you watch something like Fellow Travelers, and you're like, I hope this is educating an audience to understand how important it is to stand up and protect the love and the rights that we have today. At the same time, it's a celebration because I've never seen anything like this on television. I've never seen anything like this. We were talking tonight at dinner. I've never seen a character like Marcus, who is an everyman, that is simply about his queerness is not his adjective. Being queer is not a playable adjective. And you see each of these characters are queer, but they're actually fighting for something deeper and more substantial to their existence. And so I just celebrate the fact that we got to make this. I'm not sure, you know, going forward in this business, what the future of queer television looks like, but I hope and pray that it includes more shows like Fellow Travelers.
Hear, hear. Well, I want to thank you all again for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all for coming. There's 7 more episodes to watch, so please do it.